What would you do if you just undergone major spinal surgery? Your doctor banned you from lifting anything, standing longer than 15 minutes at a time, or climbing stairs repeatedly for a full month, and your husband nonchalantly dropped a life-altering announcement like it was a trivial weather update. Today I'm sharing this raw, eye-opening real-life marriage story that exposes the silent, invisible toll countless women endure in long-term relationships. 22 years of unappreciated labor, a devastating lack of boundaries, and one woman's calm, unshakable awakening that flipped her entire marriage upside down for good. It was just 5 days after my spinal incision surgery when Kyle leaned against our bedroom doorway, arms folded tight across his chest, watching me struggle to prop myself up on our pillows. My lower back was still locked in a rigid surgical brace, a faint blue bruise lingering on my left hand from the IV line that had fed me meds in the hospital, and every small movement sent a sharp, throbbing ache down my spine. I was still deep in recovery, strictly bound by my surgeon's written medical restrictions, rules printed in bold black font on a paper I'd tucked in my nightstand, right beside my barely touched pain medication. I'd been rationing every oxycodone pill, determined to stay present and aware while my body healed from invasive back surgery that required cutting through muscle and tissue to repair spinal damage. None of that mattered to Kyle in that moment. With zero warmth or concern in his voice, flat and indifferent, he told me his entire family, all 12 members, was coming to stay at our house for 2 full weeks starting that Saturday, and I needed to have every single thing ready for their arrival. I actually laughed at first, convinced it was a thoughtless joke. There was no way he'd force a house full of visiting relatives on me when I could barely sit up without wincing. Right? But when I lifted my eyes to meet his cold, unsmiling gaze, my smile died instantly. He was dead serious. That split second is when I felt it. The quiet, irreversible shift in my 22-year marriage that I'd completely missed for decades. For context, research from the American Marriage and Family Therapy Association confirms that long-term marital imbalance rarely happens overnight. It creeps in slowly, through years of unreciprocated small sacrifices, unspoken expectations, and one partner consistently prioritizing their family's needs over their spouse's well-being. That's exactly what had happened here. For 22 years, I'd been the sole caregiver, the endless host, the invisible backbone of every single one of Kyle's family gatherings, and he'd grown so accustomed to my sacrifice that he no longer saw me as a partner, just a convenient, always available house manager. I kept my voice steady and calm when I begged him to reconsider. I've learned over 2 decades with Kyle that raising my voice never yields compassion, only defensiveness. I explained I was only days out of major surgery, bound by strict medical recovery rules, and pleaded with him to postpone the family visit for just a week or 2, until my body could handle basic daily tasks again. His response was ice cold. He never even glanced up from his phone, too busy scrolling to acknowledge my physical pain and medical limitations, and simply said, "No one is waiting, just do as I say." Those 7 words didn't sting my heart like a typical marital fight would. They settled heavy and sick in my stomach, like curdled milk, a visceral gut punch that laid bare every unfair layer of our marriage. In that moment, I wasn't his wife, the woman who'd loved and supported him for 22 years, the woman who'd grown up in this house and inherited it from my parents. I was a disposable employee begging for a sick day during a busy season, and he was my boss, casually denying my request without a second thought for my health or humanity. I didn't argue in the moment. I've never been the type of person who reacts impulsively to conflict. I need time to process hurt, to dissect every angle of a situation, to fully understand my own feelings before I speak up. So I just nodded silently, and he left the room looking completely satisfied, already texting his mother final arrival details without a single backward glance at my fragile state. That night, I lay awake for hours long after Kyle's breathing slowed into a deep sleep. The ceiling fan spun slowly above me, its blades catching the faint blue glow of the street lamp outside our window, and my back ached with a deep pain that reminded me exactly how serious my surgery had been. For the first time in 22 years, I didn't just go through the motions of lying awake, I actively reflected on every single summer of our marriage, every endless family visit I'd single-handedly managed without a single word of thanks or support. Without fail, every summer since we'd tied the knot, Kyle's family descended on our home like a loud, demanding traveling crew of 12. There was his 50-year marriage parents, George and Linda, who had unsolicited opinions on every tiny detail of my life, from how I stacked the dishwasher and folded laundry to how I seasoned a roast and tended my flower beds. There was his brother Ethan, who'd slurred more than once over beer that this house always felt like the family home. A subtle, erasing comment that stripped me of my ownership and turned my childhood home into a communal hotel for his convenience. Then there was Ethan's wife, their two moody teenagers, Kyle's younger sister, her husband, and their tiny toddler. Adorable. Yes. But another endless layer of work for me, quartering grapes for the toddler, sanitizing high chairs, cleaning up constant messes for 2 straight weeks every year. I started doing the math that night. Out of quiet, desperate curiosity, every summer, I planned custom grocery lists to accommodate George's spicy food aversion and Linda's gluten intolerance, plus the teenagers' nonstop demand for a specific brand of string cheese. I made up every guest bed, blew up endless air mattresses for overflow guests, washed mountains of strangers' sheets and towels, drove hours to pick everyone up from the airport, planned 3 daily meals for a dozen people, and smiled for family photos while I was always the one mid-task, seconds away from darting back to the kitchen to fix another problem. For 22 years, not a single person in his family ever asked if I was tired. No one ever checked if the timing worked for my schedule, my health, or my life. It just worked, because I always made it work, quietly, tirelessly, and without complaint. I thought of my daughter Chloe, away at college 3 states over, fast asleep in her dorm room, completely unaware that her mom was lying in the dark, tallying up a lifetime of unappreciated exhaustion. I thought of the promise I'd made to myself in the hospital recovery room, groggy from anesthesia. This surgery would be my turning point. After 20 years of prioritizing and protecting everyone else, I'd finally start protecting myself. I'd finally stop disappearing to serve other people's comfort. I reached for my pain meds on the nightstand, shook out one pill, then set the bottle down untouched. I needed a clear head more than I needed pain relief that night. I grabbed my laptop instead, its pale screen lighting up my surgical brace and tired face, and did something I'd never done in 22 years of marriage. I didn't pull up recipes, grocery lists, or baby crib rental information. I opened the fireproof box my father had bought decades ago, tucked away in our closet, and pulled out the manila folder holding our home's deed. This house was never our house to begin with. My parents bought it in 1994. I grew up within these walls. The room that was now a guest room for Linda every summer was once my childhood bedroom, then Chloe's nursery, then her teen bedroom. When my dad passed away 8 years ago, and my mom followed 2 years later, the house was legally left entirely to me. Not me and Kyle, just me alone. I remembered signing the inheritance papers at the lawyer's office all those years ago, sitting next to a distracted Kyle who'd barely looked up from his phone, muttering a dismissive, "That's great, honey," without a single question about the legal details. He'd never asked to see the deed. He'd never needed to. In his mind, the second we moved our furniture into my childhood home, it became shared property, his to do with as he pleased, no input or permission needed from the sole legal owner. That night, sitting alone on the hallway bathroom toilet with a flashlight, my aching spine forcing me to hunch awkwardly, I read every line of the legal paperwork twice. The wording was crystal clear. No loopholes, no fine print, sole owner, Melissa. Only my name, beneath my father's signature, and the official notary seal. I didn't feel explosive anger in that moment. What settled over me was far more powerful, unshakable clarity. For decades, I'd let my love for my husband override my own boundaries, my own health, my own legal rights. I'd let my childhood home become a free bed and breakfast for his entire family, sacrificing my time, money, and energy with zero recognition. The next morning, the second Kyle left for work, I called Diane Foster, the attorney who'd handled my parents' estate years prior. She remembered me instantly, recalling the homemade jam I'd brought her as a thank you after the inheritance process closed. I spilled everything to her: the fresh spinal surgery, the strict medical restrictions, Kyle's unreasonable demand to host 12 family members for 2 weeks, his complete refusal to compromise or consider my recovery. Diane listened patiently, the way only an experienced family attorney can, and cut straight to the truth no one had ever told me before. Legally, I had full and exclusive authority over my property. My husband had no legal right to demand guests in my home. No cosign required for any decision I made about my own house. She delivered a life-changing line I jotted down on a sticky note and taped to my laptop. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty. It's the bare minimum of taking care of yourself. A lot of people in my situation would feel guilty for prioritizing their own healing over family expectations. But Diane helped me see the bigger picture. Recovering from major spinal surgery is not a minor inconvenience. It's a life-altering physical trauma that requires full rest. No person's spouse or family has the right to demand a recovering patient sacrifice their health for social gatherings. I want to pose a question for you guys watching right now. If the roles were reversed, would I have been expected to push through major surgery to host Kyle's family? We all know the answer. Double standards in marital labor are far more common than most people realize, and they chip away at a person's self-worth for decades. We talked for 20 more minutes about clean, legal logistics, how to handle the situation without backlash, how to build a solid paper trail to protect myself from claims of overreacting or cruelty. Diane never once told me to reconsider, never suggested I was being dramatic, never minimized my exhaustion as a fleeting emotion. She treated my pain, my medical limits, and my burnout as undeniable facts, and that's the validation I needed for 22 years. I sat at the kitchen table for hours after that call, staring out at the backyard where George always set up his folding chair in the only patch of shade, where Linda always wandered my flower beds to lecture me on mulch and gardening. I thought about my upcoming physical therapy appointments, about how I could barely lift a laundry basket without crying out in pain, about how impossible it would be to cook, clean, and cater to 12 people while healing from spinal surgery. This wasn't revenge. I wasn't plotting to hurt Kyle or his family. I was just finally refusing to disappear for other people's comfort anymore. I spent the next few days building a careful, fair plan. No drama, no malice, just self-preservation. I made 3 key phone calls from my car in a pharmacy parking lot 2 miles from home, reclining my seat to take pressure off my healing back, determined to follow through before Kyle's persuasive charm could talk me out of standing up for myself, like he always had before. First, I booked Buckeye Restoration, a licensed interior renovation company, for a full home assessment and 2-week interior restoration project. I didn't make up issues. Our upstairs hallway had a lingering water stain I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, alongside minor flooring and drywall repairs the house genuinely needed. The crew was scheduled to arrive Saturday morning, exactly when Kyle's family planned to check in, with a confirmed 2-week work timeline. Second, I scheduled an emergency HVAC inspection for our rattling central air system, a legitimate issue that had been bugging us for a month. For the first time in my marriage, I prioritized my home's actual maintenance needs over catering to other people's temporary comfort. Third, I hired a reputable painting company recommended by Diane, one with a strict contract clause: no residents allowed in the home during interior renovations and floor refinishing, due to safety and liability rules. That clause was the quiet, firm boundary I needed. I confirmed the policy twice in writing, to ensure a foolproof paper trail. I also contacted my insurance company and secured a short-term rehab apartment stay 15 minutes from home, designed for post-surgery recovery. It had single-level flooring, bathroom safety grab bars, and weekly nurse wellness checks. Everything I needed to heal properly. Away from the chaos Kyle was determined to create. He'd never once asked where I planned to recover while hosting 12 guests, never checked on my recovery plan, never cared about my well-being at all. Friday night, while Kyle was out finalizing his family's arrival plans with his brother, I packed a small bag slowly, my surgical brace creaking with every movement. I packed 2 weeks of clothes, my medication, my post-surgery medical instructions, my laptop, and a framed photo of my parents. I left a calm, factual note on the kitchen counter. I've relocated for court. Ordered post-surgery recovery. The house is closed for scheduled renovations. Starting Saturday, contractors have full access. No interruptions permitted per insurance liability rules. I drove to the rehab apartment alone, wincing over every pothole in the road, and slept the deepest, most peaceful sleep I'd had since my surgery. No tossing and turning over endless to-do lists. No lying awake, dreading 2 weeks of uncompensated labor. No prioritizing everyone else over myself. I wasn't home to witness the chaos Saturday morning, but piece by piece, Kyle and Linda told me everything in the weeks that followed. 3 full SUVs packed with suitcases, coolers, beach gear, and Ethan's mandatory yearly seafood haul pulled up to our driveway at 10 a.m. 12 people piled out, chattering excitedly about sleeping arrangements and meal plans, until they spotted the 2 laminated signs taped level to our front door, home closed for renovation. No occupancy until further notice. Per contractor and insurance policy. Through the front windows, they could see the renovation crew already hard at work, sanding floors, covering furniture in plastic sheeting, fresh primer fuming through the screen door. Kyle stood frozen on the porch for what Linda described as an eternity, staring at the signs like he could will them to disappear. The crew foreman stepped outside, polite but unyielding, and explained the strict liability policy. No one could occupy the home during active renovations, no exceptions. Kyle called me 4 times in a row before I even turned my phone on. When I finally unlocked my screen and saw the stack of missed calls, I felt no triumph, no petty joy, just a quiet, unfamiliar calm, the peace of a woman who'd finally made a decision solely for her own well-being after 22 years of living for everyone else. I let the 4th call go to voicemail, then answered the 5th. His voice was sharp, clipped, and furious. No trace of his usual smooth charm. No, how are you feeling? No concern for my recovery. Just an immediate accusation. What did you do? I kept my voice steady, exactly how I'd practiced it for days, and told him the simple truth. I did exactly what my doctor ordered. I'm 5 days out of spinal surgery, physically incapable of hosting 12 people. I begged you to postpone this, and you refused. Now I'm prioritizing my recovery and my home's necessary repairs. He ranted about his parents standing on the porch, his exhausted kids confused and upset, how humiliating this was for him and his family. I didn't argue, I simply restated my boundaries and hung up after a long, charged silence. Next to Linda called, furious and condescending, blasting me for being selfish, for ruining their family trip after a 6-hour drive. For 22 years I'd swallowed her judgment, her unsolicited criticism, her endless demands, but this time I didn't waste breath on arguments. I texted her a photo of my hospital discharge papers, and bolded surgeon restrictions. No heavy lifting. Limited standing time. 4 weeks of mandatory full rest. I added one simple line. This is why. I hope you all find comfortable accommodations. Then I flipped my phone face down, and ignored it for the rest of the day. Later that night, George left a booming voicemail accusing me of making the entire family look foolish, claiming a good wife never abandons her husband when he needs her. I listened once, deleted it, and realized my hands weren't even shaking. For decades, Their judgment had shaken me to my core. But now I was free of that people-pleasing weight. What happened next was the ultimate wake-up call for Kyle. For 22 years, I'd silently managed every single detail of these family visits. The meals, the travel, the complaints, the special requests, the endless small crises, so seamlessly that Kyle never even realized how much work it took. Left to handle it alone, he crumbled instantly. With every local hotel booked solid from a weekend wedding, he was forced to book overpriced Marriott rooms for all 12 family members for 2 weeks, costing nearly $4,000 before meals and incidentals. For the first time in his life, he dealt with the endless petty conflicts I'd resolved alone for decades. George refusing Kyle's dinner choice, Linda's sensitive stomach, rejecting Ethan's compromise restaurant pick, a toddler-specific cracker brand unavailable at local stores, forgotten prescription medication runs, bored teens begging for shopping trips, and non-stop complaints from every family member. He worked tirelessly from morning till midnight, exhausted and overwhelmed, finally seeing the invisible labor I'd poured out for free for 22 years. While he navigated that chaos, I rested. I did my physical therapy exercises, took slow walks down the rehab hallway, iced my back each night, and finished a novel I'd started 8 months prior. Something I'd never had the quiet, uninterrupted time to do in my own chaotic, guest-filled home. On the third night, I lay in bed listening to the soft hum of the AC and felt pure, guilt-free peace for the first time in my adult life. This wasn't punishment. This was self-care. Kyle's text messages shifted drastically over the week. The first 2 days were filled with angry capitalized rants and accusations of selfishness. By mid-week, they devolved into tired, defeated one-liners. Long day. Mom wants steak. Dad bans red meat, can't win. I didn't reply. For the first time in my marriage, I didn't feel obligated to fix his problems, to soothe his stress, or to rescue him from the consequences of his own choices. My daughter Chloe called midweek, laughing as she told me Linda had begged her to talk some sense into me. Chloe, now a mature college student, instantly defended me, telling her grandmother I'd just had major surgery, and she was the one who needed to rethink her entitled attitude. That laugh, the first genuine, unforced laugh I'd had in days, loosened a weight in my chest I didn't know I was carrying. By day 6, Kyle called again, his voice worn thin and defeated. No anger left. He ranted about cranky kids, complaining parents, Ethan refusing to host anyone, and finally admitted the truth he'd avoided for 22 years. Somehow our house was always supposed to be big enough for everyone. No questions asked. He trailed off mid-sentence, finally realizing how unfair that unspoken rule had always been. That's when I pulled up the spreadsheet I'd kept for 15 years. I'd originally started it to track our household budget and save for Chloe's college tuition, but over time, I'd quietly logged every expense tied to Kyle's annual family visits. No bitterness, just quiet record keeping. I tallied every inflated summer grocery bill, every July utility spike, every replaced punctured air mattress, every new guest room mattress for George's bad back, every rental car for Ethan's broken truck, every flight I'd secretly paid for his parents when their retirement funds fell short. The final number stopped me cold: $185,412. Over 22 years, I'd spent nearly $200,000 of my own money, plus thousands of uncompensated hours of labor, hosting and caring for Kyle's family, with zero reciprocation, zero thanks, zero acknowledgement of the sacrifice. I didn't cry. I felt a surgeon's precise, unemotional clarity, finally seeing the full scope of the one-sided relationship I'd dedicated my adult life to. I spent my final days in rehab compiling a full documented presentation, 22 years of receipts, bank statements, utility bills, and candid photos proving my endless unpaid labor. I titled it simply 22 Years of Hospitality, with the total dollar amount printed clearly on the cover. I broke down every annual expense, circled every summer utility spike, and attached photos of the upgrades and purchases I'd made solely for his family's comfort. On the final day of the planned family visit, I asked Kyle to gather everyone at the house. The renovations were finished early. The house fresh and restored, no longer worn down from years of overuse and endless guests. I arrived slowly, my surgical brace loosened as my recovery improved, and found all 12 family members waiting in the living room, fully expecting me to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to fall back into my old role as the accommodating invisible host. Instead of sitting down, I handed every single person a copy of my presentation folder. I stood by the fireplace, the spot where I'd stood in hundreds of family photos, always just out of frame, and asked two simple, unanswerable questions. Can anyone name one vacation where I was treated like a guest instead of a maid? Can anyone remember a single summer in 22 years where you asked if I was healthy enough, rested enough, or willing to host all of you? The room went completely silent. Linda's face fell instantly. George shifted awkwardly in his seat. Ethan's jaw tightened as he flipped through the receipts and photos documenting every sacrifice I'd made. Kyle stared down at his folder, and I watched recognition dawn on his face. No defensiveness, no denial, just pure, unfiltered realization of how much he'd taken from me for decades. I told them I didn't want their money back. I wasn't after repayment. I'd compiled the proof for myself, to finally validate my own exhaustion and sacrifice after spending 22 years doubting my own sense of fairness. I looked directly at Linda and said, I've loved having your family in my life, but I have never loved being invisible in my own home. No one apologized that day. No one needed to. The silent shame and realization in the room was enough. I left quietly and returned to my rehab apartment for one more night, finally free from the burden of carrying everyone else's comfort on my shoulders alone. When I moved back home 11 days after leaving, the house felt brand new. Fresh paint, restored floors, fixed AC, no clutter, no chaos, just peace. Kyle and I didn't have a dramatic, explosive conversation that night. Real marital healing doesn't happen in one big fight, it happens in hundreds of small, intentional changes over time. A few days later, over cold coffee at our kitchen table, Kyle gave me the most honest speech he'd ever delivered. I didn't know any of this. Not just the money, but all the work. I never had to know, because you always fixed everything. I'm so sorry, I never saw you. He admitted the 2 weeks of managing his family alone had been miserable and exhausting, and he finally fully understood the toll I'd paid for 22 years. We set firm, long overdue boundaries that week. No more open-door family policy, no more unplanned, uninvited extended stays. All future family visits require mutual advance agreement, clear guest responsibilities, and shared labor. Guests would now cook, clean, and contribute. No more treating me like full-time staff. The real proof of change came 6 weeks later, when we invited only George and Linda for a small planned dinner with 2 weeks' notice. Linda showed up with a homemade casserole, something she'd never done in 22 years of visits. George went out of his way to compliment the home renovations, a quiet acknowledgement of my work. When Ethan called to invite himself over unannounced, Kyle firmly shut him down, stating all visits need prior mutual approval. The most transformative moment came when I overheard Kyle defending me to his father on the phone. This is Melissa's home first. It was hers before it was ours. I failed to respect that for years, and that's my fault, not hers. This is how it's going to be from now on. Standing there in my own kitchen, listening to my husband finally see me, respect me, and defend me after 22 years, I felt a lifelong weight lift from my chest. Months later, in October, Linda called me out of the blue. Her tone was soft, tentative, nothing like her usual commanding, entitled voice. She asked if she could visit for just an afternoon the following Saturday, promising to call ahead and bring lunch. It wasn't a verbal apology, but it was something far more meaningful: respect. After 22 years of treating my home as her entitled vacation spot, she was finally asking for permission to enter my space. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if you've ever poured endless love, labor, and sacrifice into your relationships, while no one notices your exhaustion, this story is for you. Boundaries aren't selfish. Self-preservation isn't cruelty. It's never too late to stop disappearing for other people and start demanding to be seen, respected, and valued. I'd love to connect with you all below. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from, and share if you've ever had to set hard boundaries to save your peace. I read every single comment. If you want more raw, honest stories about love, marriage, self-worth, and healing, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got so many more real-life stories to share that will make you feel seen and empower you to prioritize yourself.